Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Supply Chain Management, What a Good Program Looks Like. My name's Amy, and I'm a part of the marketing team at PJRFSI. And we'd like to first off thank everybody for taking the time to join us for today's presentation. And we're very excited to be hosting Jennifer Crandall from Safe Food en Route. I'll be introducing her to you all later in the webinar. But before we get started, I just want to note that while all of our attendees today are muted to ensure sound quality, we do want to take your questions. So if you think of anything you want to know more about or you need clarification on any point, please go ahead and type that question into the questions tab of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll answer as many questions as we can after the prepared slides have been covered. The questions we get most often have to do with the availability of slides to download or a recording of the webinar. Both a recording and the slides will be available usually within about 24 to 48 hours after the end of the webinar session from our website at www.pjrfsi.com. So these are just showing you really quickly where to find that questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel. And if for some reason you can't access that panel or you have difficulty with it, we will have contact information for our presenters at the end of the broadcast where you can just shoot them an email with any other questions if you're unable to use the question feature. So now before we introduce our first speaker of the day, I'd like to launch a quick polling question just to get a feel for who we have in the audience today. And that first question is going to be, are you currently certified to a GFSI standard? And that would be, yes, maybe you're certified with us here at PJRFSI, maybe you're certified with another CB, maybe you're not certified yet, but you'd like to become certified, or even if you're not interested in becoming certified, maybe you're here just to learn a little bit more about supply chain management and food safety. So go ahead and just make a quick vote here on this poll. We'll leave it open for a few more seconds, and we're getting some good responses in. It looks like the majority of people on the call today are currently certified, which we always like to see that you're taking that step. All right, we'll give it a few more seconds here. We've got about half participation, so get those votes in, please. And all poll responses and questions are anonymous. We do only use first names for questions, so if you're maybe a little shy about asking questions or participating, don't worry. We're not going to go shouting your name from the rooftops. All right, and that's how everybody voted today, so thank you all for participating. And we'll move right along to introduce our first speaker. And our first speaker today is Paul Demarin. He is the Senior Vice President of Food Safety and Supply Chain here at PJRFSI. Even though he only just joined us back in January of this year, Paul's already done so much to help our program. And really, especially these webinars, he's been super passionate and really helpful in getting a lot of these sessions off the ground. So big thank you to Paul. He has over 35 years of experience in the hospitality, service, and retail agri-food sectors. And before he came to PJRFSI, Paul worked for 15 years in the certification industry with clients in every sector, from food safety and supply chain to brand protection and quality. Paul also worked for many years in management system certification, and before that, he was a professional chef and a consultant for over 20 years, working in major hotel chains, restaurants, private golf courses, and food service organizations. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Paul. And Paul, you can take it away.
That's great. Thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate that introduction. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our call today. We really appreciate your time. Before I give a short overview of our company, I just want to acknowledge that even though we're still in the middle of the pandemic, I'm very, very happy to see that we're slowly starting to reopen our businesses. I want you to know that everyone still at PJRFSI is fully committed to the health and well-being of our staff, our customers, and our communities. We're taking very strict precautions, not only in our business, but also how we're managing our clients from an audit perspective to ensure that we are meeting the requirements of groups like the CDC and the FDA, et cetera. So as Amy mentioned, my name's Paul. I'm the SVP with Perry Johnson Registrars Food Safety Inc. I'll just refer to us today as FSI. And today I'm going to give you a short overview of our company. I also have the pleasure of welcoming Jennifer Crandall, a close colleague of mine from Safe Food en Route, And Jen's going to share our stage today and speak to you about the important topics as it relates to building and managing a strong supplier program. So let's jump right in. Perry Johnson Registrars, or PJR, was originally founded by Perry L. Johnson in '94, and we've really been at the forefront of certification and registration from the very beginning. We achieved ANAB accreditation in 1995, and then over the next 10 years, expanded our business overseas, really across Europe, Asia Pacific, and certainly the Americas. PGLA, our laboratory accreditation business, was also founded in '99, and then we got our UCAS accreditation as well during that same time when we expanded further into the United Kingdom and China. In 2005, PGA&A was founded, and that's our healthcare technology company. And they specialize in transcription, medical coding, telemedicine, virtual scribing services, etc. Shortly thereafter is when FSI was born, and this was from a result in demand in the industry for third-party certification to many of the food safety and quality standards that we all know. We're headquartered in Troy, Michigan, and we're truly a global company. We're part of a family of companies actually in the registration, testing and certification arenas. We have global offices around the world, and we have a wide range of certification and inspection services, everything from HACCP to GFSI, organic and gluten-free, cannabis and hemp. We do a lot of the social responsibility and accountability assessments like SMETA and SA 8000, and even CTPAT for border security, as well as the FDA audits. So we work with companies essentially across the entire food supply chain from farm to fork, everyone from processing and distribution to the retailers, processors, importers and exporters and distribution companies to really help them manage not only their food safety requirements, but supply chain quality and brand protection as well. We're very much committed to adding value for our clients. And really everyone here at our company, we believe that rigor and consistency during your audit leads to higher level of customer and end user satisfaction. We're currently recognized as a leading certification body in the Americas. We were previously recognized as #1 in the US by the IAAR. We believe that there's a real difference between not just servicing our clients, but focusing on our clients. And we're really dedicated to uphold the highest standards of professionalism, competence, and integrity throughout the life cycle of our partnership. So as Perry Johnson did over 30 years ago, we apply the principles of quality management, collaboration, operational excellence, and we do that in all of our field and audit activities. And we certainly follow the requirements that are set forth by international standard organizations, accreditation bodies, and scheme owners. We currently have over 460 auditors based in 60 countries around the world who understand not only the regulations of those countries, but also the language and, equally important, the culture of these countries. I'm also happy to report that in the last 5 years, we've received a strong rating from our clients of 9.5 out of 10, and we're very proud of that. So now, as this slide points out, certification industry has been deemed an essential service, but why is that? It's because certification is really based on the results of tests, inspections, and audits give confidence to you and me as the consumer that an organization's products and systems are being evaluated against national and international standards. We all know that it's not business as usual, far from it. There are a lot of changes that are happening in our businesses today that are requiring us to run things quite a bit differently, but we still are committed to providing a high quality service during this time. In today's market, it's really even more critical because the landscape is constantly changing. It's a dynamic place. Trends are shifting. Customer expectations are moving quite quickly. From recall to regulation, navigating that landscape and staying on top of that is a very challenging situation for any organization scope or size. We define our services into 4 main areas: auditing and certification to third-party accredited schemes, like all of the GFSI standards, We do a lot of second-party auditing as well, and we do customer-specific auditing or first-party that we generally use for our supply chain clients. As well, we have full training program to support all of the programs that we service. So this here is looks at specifically the FSI side of the house. We currently have about 30 programs that we support today. And as we know, there's many different types of audits in the industry. We have accredited, unaccredited, some are government regulated, some are retailer mandated. We categorize those offerings into 5 main channels. First party audits, these are our customer specific audits where our corporate clients or entity owns the audit standard. They've written and developed it, but they would utilize us to conduct those audits, usually because we have auditors around the world in those countries who understand the language. We can minimize the cost to their business. These are all typical reasons clients would use us to perform these types of audits or inspections. Our second party standards are very similar, but it is FSI who actually owns these standards. We've written them, we've developed them, we own the content, we do the technical review, etc. And that would be standards such as our GMP for manufacturing, GDP for distribution, our cannabis and hemp standards, which I'm actually very proud to say that about a month ago have been officially accredited under ANAB, the first certification body in the world for cannabis and hemp accredited programs. And then of course we have our third party standards where we are accredited ourselves under ISO 17065 for our food programs and 17021 for our non-food programs. And these are the standards that govern us as a certification body. And then finally, we're also recognized to perform various government audits and inspections such as FSMA, FSVP for the verification program, or the Voluntary Qualified Importer Program, VQIP. Now, here is a sample of the depth of core management system standards that really started it all. We conduct accredited audits across many different schemes, quality, environmental, aerospace, automotive, and we do that for not only our customers, but their supply chain. And if you think about it, food safety in general, from a certification standpoint, is over 10 years old now, but it's really still in its infancy compared to many of these standards here. There's a dynamic shift that I've seen over the last number of years with working towards integrating the audits together. There are a lot of combined audits, there's a lot of bolt-on audits, but with the exception of FSSC, there aren't really any schemes out there that are truly integrating with other well-known international management system standards. It's not very often that you see somebody doing a BRC audit and an ISO 14001 for environment at the same time. However, I do see that that is going to be the way of the future and really where the industry I see is going. Now, I'd just like to talk a little bit about some of the relationships that we have here. We're recognized around the world by many accreditation bodies and scheme owners. This gives assurance to our customers that our family of companies operates under the rules of accreditation, which regulate and help us maintain our quality of work. On many occasions, we partner with these organizations to deliver webinars and up-to-date information about the schemes, the standards, the industry. We've been doing that for a very long time, and we look to continue to do that. So the accreditation is really a large investment that's made every year by a certification body to maintain this and give confidence to our consumers. But at the end of the day, it's very much worth it because our customers then know they're partnering with a group who's respected and recognized around the world. So now I would like to just talk a little bit more about supply chain risk. Because our main featured topic today is supply chain, I wanted to shift gears away from my standard discussion around COVID and what we're doing as a certification body to talk a little bit more specific and have a few more considerations for supplier programs and how we as a certification body can support your programs. So these programs manage your supplier's risk. That can take several forms with us. It could be custom first party audit protocol. It could be second party or a combination of both. Now, this particular slide here, I want to bring your attention to a couple of things. Sometimes I like to try and add a little bit of humor here and mention that, supply chain network, the picture on the left is very straightforward and easy to understand. However, we all know that's not accurate at all. Supply chains are extremely intricate and very confusing on their best day. The top right with our cat and dogs picture, the cat is really more concerned about the risk in front of him without considering the bigger picture and the risks all around him. So this is actually also very accurate in the real world when you're looking at managing the risk of your supply chain and protecting your brand. It's often been said that suppliers are the greatest risk to your business. It's very critical when you're looking at the risk of your business to do so with a much larger lens than just food safety. We have to consider the bigger picture. So many times when I'm working with my customers, I first start speaking to them about their supplier program. Usually the discussions are fairly narrow in scope. In other words, we're just talking about food safety. But there are many areas of risk that a supplier can impose on your business that maybe you haven't considered as being a part of your protocol. Maybe you have. But things like, do they have a solid understanding of your expectations as a business? Do they have a management approach that is complementary of yours? Do they have the capacity to manage your business? Are you a sole supplier? What about things like social responsibility, environmental health and safety, or concerns like financial stability? There's nothing wrong with focusing your program on GMPs, food safety or quality, but I always want to make sure that my customers are aware we can go much deeper than that, and oftentimes we should. So you'll see I've highlighted here management approach and financial stability. I just want to give you an example of how we could go a little deeper here. Now, this is just a sample of some of the additional questions that could be added, on an audit with us around management approach to ensure that your suppliers are a good fit for your business. You should really be considering audit questions that include the future vision of your suppliers. If it's complementary to yours, what changes are they making or have they made in their environment to support your future growth? Can they handle your capacity? Do they have appropriate controls in place? Are they managing things like business continuity planning? I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that not too many people expected a global pandemic. How many of your key suppliers have contingency plans in place to address this, or did before the pandemic hit? Now, looking at financial stability, this is something that's quite important, and it's often overlooked during an audit. But in my opinion, it should be part of your audit, because the stability of your suppliers is critical to your business and your growth. Oftentimes, companies will tell me they're not sure how their suppliers are financially stable, or they find it hard to ask questions because most clients don't want to open up their books during an audit. And I can certainly understand this. Oftentimes, companies are not willing to share this information. But there are many different ways to skin a cat, as you can see here. We can ask pertinent questions of their business that can, at the end of the day, help to paint a picture for you of their financial stability. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope that this is leading in nicely to Jennifer's topic. But I guess just to wrap up here, we have over 30 years experience at Perry Johnson and our family of companies. Our goal is to provide a significant amount of value for you, our clients, and give you greater transparency in our partnership. Look to minimize your costs wherever possible and increase the brand protection for you at the organization level. So on a daily basis, we look to continue to publish content that is relevant and important for you. Just remember, we're only at the beginning of the pandemic, really, and we need to start building our plans for recovery post-COVID-19. This includes a pivot to many business models, our operations, your supplier policies, maybe even offboarding strategies, the different technologies that you're using, remobilizing your workforce. This is a very big time, and it's a monumental change that we've all gone through. So now's the time for us to start executing and laying out those plans to help bring confidence, back to industry and to your employees that we're in control. So thanks very much for your time, everyone. I really appreciate it. I hope it was of value, and I'll pass it back over to you, Amy.
Great, thanks so much, Paul. Before we introduce our featured speaker for today, I do have another polling question to send to you all. And that is, what struggles do you face becoming certified with one of the GFSI audit schemes? So just choose whatever would apply best to you. If you don't see anything that necessarily applies, you can abstain from answering. There's no shame, obviously, in having difficulty, but basically expense and time, maybe you need more training, you're non-competitive, or there's capital improvements, you're not ready, maybe you're trying to just meet minimum requirements with regulations or to get HACCP principles in place. If you have no struggles, maybe you're committed or maybe you're already certified. That's always a good problem to have. Or maybe you're just generally unfamiliar. So just get those answers in and we will roll right along in just a moment. All right. All right. And it looks like the majority of you, either you're unfamiliar with requirements or you have expense or time difficulties if you're not already certified with no struggles. So that's always great to see. And moving right along, it's time for me to introduce our speaker for today. And I'd like to introduce you to Jennifer Crandall. She is the CEO and founder of Safe Food en Route. Jennifer has a food science degree from Purdue and has 8 years of manufacturing experience with 12 years at Kroger's corporate offices. In 2018, she founded Safe Food en Route and is a U.S. country partner with Primority Limited. Jennifer and her team are in the food safety consulting space with focus on the FSMA rules, aka the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSVP, and supplier compliance management. In today's presentation, Jennifer will be sharing with you some information about supply chain management from the food safety perspective. So Jennifer, why don't you go ahead and take it away from here?
All right. And I don't know if I have control, so
you should. Yep. Go ahead and try to move on. There you go.
All right. Perfect. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So real quick, just on the agenda today, we're going to cover the following topics, doing supplier selection and somewhat of a product approval approach, FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, and food safety certifications. And then we'll be touching on supplier monitoring and then how to use automation in this process. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about the typical supplier product approval process that most companies go through. In larger companies, they tend to have a lengthier process to that. And if some of you are familiar with working with some of the larger retailers, you might have been through this process if you're a manufacturing company or some type of supplier to them, where it seems like it might take 9 to 12 months sometimes to get through the process of getting a product approved, because they have several different people wearing different hats, and a lot of them have subject matter experts for categories of foods depending on the product offerings in the company. So like from a retailer perspective, you probably have seen it where you might work with different people for the dairy aisle than you would for the baking needs aisle or something to that effect. And a lot of times each one of these positions, the sales, the brand manager, the buyers, they all have different people associated with those different categories as well. So it ends up being a very large department, sometimes 300 or more people that are managing all of the space in the grocery store. But when you come down to a smaller and medium-sized company, you might not have that same type of bandwidth, and so a lot of people are wearing multiple hats. And I highlighted specifically here on supplier risk and quality assurance and regulatory compliance. A lot of times that, along with product development, which is not really even mentioned in this process, falls on one person in the manufacturing facility, and that's usually the QA manager or a product development manager or someone to that effect. And so that's just like a really high level overview of what the process might look like. But let's go back to maybe where it might be in the beginning of the process, and kind of stealing some information from Paul's earlier presentation. And then also, there's a reference here, and you'll see there's a link in this. So whenever you receive the copy of the presentation later, you can click that link and you'll go to a doodle ad that Perry Johnson has put together that is really insightful about what to look for supplier product approvals and for that risk assessment that might be going on. So, let's just briefly talk about it. The way I look at it, even though there are 3 buckets here, you kind of have a 2-step approach in general to the entire process. This is step 1, approving the supplier. So you're thinking about different aspects, the risk, the reputational risk, as Paul alluded to, the financial risks, geographical. Sometimes you might go through a bidding process with one of these larger organizations, and what they are doing in the background when they are vetting their suppliers, they are looking at pest analysis and SWOT analysis, things that will help them, tools that will help them be able to decide, is there a political risk with that geographical region? Is there an economical risk with it, social factors and technological factors? Sometimes it might be an infrastructure consideration that might come into play, where you're buying from a country that doesn't have great highway systems or does not have a good way for the product to get to the port. So those types of risks you want to kind of think about, and that is all part of the bid process. Along with doing, you notice that food safety audits, social audits, those are all right here, and I kind of fall into these 2 buckets of certification and audits. That's when you're assessing whether they even meet your basic requirements as a company. So having possibly going back another step would be looking at, what are our policies? What do we feel is important to make sure that all of our supply chain meets? And as you look into some of these branding and financial groups, those are the considerations that you would do. And then KPIs. So key performance indicators. During the bid process, a lot of companies will give you a weighted score during the bid, and in different categories. So things that they find are important to their program. So you might want to do the same thing with your supply chain, where you might weight things that are critical factors for your company in order to work with that supplier. And like I mentioned before, if you look at Paul's slide, I think it was slides 13 through 15. So when you get the presentation again, look at those slides, because he spends a lot of time explaining, management approach, product quality, delivery, food safety, security, those types of things. So look at what's important to you and start grading those suppliers on those. And of course, your basic minimum public health reasons for having a food safety program are critical to that. So, my personal opinion, professional opinion as a food scientist, as somebody who's had over 22 years in the regulatory space, I feel it's very important that you would look at food safety, but that might not be the only thing that you're looking at whenever you're looking at your programs. But I am going to pop over and talk a little bit about it, because 2 things that tend to happen during this process. So that 2-step approach I mentioned, you have the the supplier approval, and then you have the product approval that is going on, sometimes parallel. And so you want to keep in mind that the food safety still has to be top of mind. So as you're going through, I just put that as a little, to me, it's very heavy, it's important. Product development, when you're designing a product, when you're trying to get the right formula and the quality, a lot of times, and no offense to salespeople, but a lot of times the sales team is very excitable about that pursuit to the perfect product to sell to the customers. And the retailers are just as excited, but a core foundation of that must be that supplier, that supply chain, whoever you might be working with, that they have those basic food safety structures in place. So I think at this stage, we're going to jump into a quick polling question. So I'll give their
Yep, I've got you right here.
Back to Amy.
No problem. No worries. All right, our 3rd polling question. What are the minimum requirements that you have on your suppliers for food safety? And the options include, we require all suppliers to have 3rd-party audits. We purchase from a broker or distributor and they manage it. Our customers dictate to us what they want, or you use GFSI benchmarked audit schemes and nothing less, or maybe none. You work with anyone who works with you. So while these answers are coming in, I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions about something that's mentioned in the presentation, or maybe you have a question that's not quite related to the slides, please go ahead and drop that question right into the questions tab on that control panel on your screens. And once we wrap up the prepared portion of the slides, we will be trying to answer as many of those questions as possible. So again, just get your answers in, and I'll double check really quick to see if we've gotten any questions so far. No? Okay. All right, so we've got about 50% responding, so I'll go ahead and close the poll. And here's how you all voted. So it looks like most of you are requiring all suppliers to at least have third-party audits, which is great. So I will hand things back to Jen, and you can go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. All right. Let's grab it back. There we go. Okay, so I like to look at the way the FDA, we mentioned that one of my core focuses in my business is the FSVP plan. And for those that are not familiar with it, that is the Foreign Supplier Verification Program rule. That is part of the FSMA laws that were put into effect. And this is one that's specifically wrapped around what it is for an importer, like the liabilities that are on an importer and what their requirements are for managing their supply chain and the foreign suppliers that are producing products to bring into the country, into the United States. And there are three main components to that process. You need to look at the products and the hazards that are associated with them. And then you need to review the supplier performance overall, and that's looking at their regulatory history and any other known issues that might be coming up with that supplier. Maybe they've had withdrawals or things that are related to customer history that you've already worked with them before, or they've had some recalls with another company. So you would look at their overall performance, and then you also need to verify that their programs are adequate to manage the hazards that you know are associated with the products that they are providing to you. So those three components to me they make a really great foundation for supply chain management when you're looking at approval processes. So let's break down real quick what a hazard analysis might look like. And there are categories set by the FDA that you are now required to look at, where you're looking at biological hazards, physical, chemical, and allergenic. Also, radiological was added to the list. So when you're kind of looking at those hazards, you need to look at the regulatory hazard guidance document that's provided by the FDA. Right now, it's a draft guidance document. And it's a really great resource to reference, even though it's not even in its final stages. It's still a great resource to reference to see what types of hazards the FDA has identified as concerns with that product, because there might be something that you're not familiar with. There are other great resources as well out there. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency has some on their websites as well. That are worth looking into, and you can look up either one of those. Whenever you Google search them, you can find those hazard guidances. And then you want to also look at the facility capabilities, what hazards might be associated with that facility. So if that facility is producing higher risk items on the line that you are purchasing product from, where they might have introduced another microbiological hazard that is not associated with your food that you're purchasing from them, or they might be, a very common would be introducing an allergen concern. So you might be buying, let's just use ice cream as a good example, and you're only buying vanilla and chocolate, but on that same production line, they might be also producing, vanilla with caramel swirl and pecans in it, or chocolate and peanuts. So they're introducing an allergen, and you would want to make sure that there are steps being taken to address those. And if those hazards are associated with that product, on that product line, what is the likelihood? So you want to rate it. What is the risk if that hazard is not controlled? What is the likelihood and the severity that it might, if somebody consumes it, that it could harm them? So you want to go through that, looking at the risks, and then you need to look, do they need controls? Does that, can that facility, can that supplier control those hazards, or does it need to be controlled another way? So you need to look at those types of things when you're doing a hazard analysis. I lost my mouse there for a second. There we go. So then also you want to look at the supplier performance. And there's multiple ways to look at that as well. As I mentioned before, you might be looking at the the audit history. We've talked a lot about third-party audits and what your requirements might be. And again, looking at the results, a lot of you are requiring that your suppliers have some type of third-party audit. But I do see that 13% allow their customers to dictate what they want from you. So that could cause an inconsistency potentially in the requirements of that supplier. Say that supplier's supplying one customer of yours one product, and they're supplying another customer another product, and both those customers have different requirements. So you want to write your programs to kind of accommodate both of those. So that's something you want to be proactively thinking about. Another thing you want to look at, as I mentioned before, was the history with your company and their regulatory compliance history. So have they had recalls? Has there been any type of regulatory action against them in the United States or outside if you're importing from another country? Have they had any problems with their own government or with another country's government? And there are ways that you can look at that. There are ways that you can get access to that data. Have they had an import alert or an import refusal or any type of regulatory citation in the United States? I speak a lot about the United States because the Foreign Supplier Verification Program rule requires a lot of these things to be considered. But then you also want to take in mind, like, what is their history with your company? If you've been purchasing them for a long time, have you ever had a problem with them in the past? Do you track that and rate it? Or, have there ever been any food safety incidents that you've been aware of? And how did you manage that? Have they had any complaints that are specifically related to the product they're supplying you? And how do you manage that? And what types of corrective actions do you put in place on them? Do you put them on any type of performance evaluation program that you're looking at them later, maybe 3 months, 6 month, improvement plans? So things like that are also a good part of reviewing their history. And then the one other area that I think is very critical, and again, going back to looking at what the poll results were, 59% of you are saying that you have third-party audit results, and then 15% are saying that you require GFSI no less on the benchmark audit schemes, which is great. So that's a large portion of you that are requiring these. But the question that I would have back to you is to think about, are you actually reading those audits, or are you just requiring that they have them and that they provide them to you to provide and pass through to your customers? Or, are you just requiring that they have them and you check the score? When you're doing a supplier performance review, you really need to read the audit and look at the audit every, is it happening every 12 months? When's the last time they had an audit? Did they do it one time to work with you or with your customer, or are they getting it on an annual basis? So for those that have third-party audits, it is not a requirement that you get a third-party audit every year, but with GFSI benchmark audit schemes, most of those require that you have an audit at least once a year, and if not, if you're on some type of corrective action plan with them, you might have to get it even sooner than 12 months. But review those, look at, and if they've been audited by a regulatory agency, look at those audits. Look at customer audits if they let you. There might be some confidentiality there that they can't provide that to you, but if they are allowed, I know in my former days, sometimes I was reading some of the competitors' audit reports, like their addendums to third-party audits, and we were allowed to read those, as long as we weren't sharing any confidential information. So it just depends on your agreements with your customers and with your suppliers. And then, Also, have you audited them? So have you walked through their facility? Have you sent your food safety team or your quality assurance team to see them? If you don't have a capacity to be able to do that, because I know, going back to smaller companies and everybody's wearing multiple hats, sometimes it's difficult to send one of your team members in to look at a facility and to make sure that they're meeting certain food safety standards that you would require. But I will tell you that from when I was working at Kroger, and it was a very beneficial thing for us to go meet with the companies and build that rapport with our suppliers. And it helped congeal some of the things that we were doing. And that's been many years ago. GFSI requirements have been put into effect with a lot of the larger retailers, so they don't have to visit as often because of the way that GFSI structure is and what those benchmark requirements are for the handling corrective actions. But it is still a really good practice, in my opinion, to visit these companies at least on a regular basis. If it's not once a year, because you can't send somebody in, maybe it's on the point of approval. So if you're looking at approving them and you've never done business with them before, sometimes that really goes a long way with helping your relationship with them, and they are eager to please because they want to work with you and they want to have a good rapport with you and get off on a good start with you. So those are the three main pillars, I would say. And then another supplier minimum requirement benchmark that I think is a great way to manage supplier compliance. And this is actually 6 high-level areas that come out of the, it's 5 high-level areas that come out of the BRC agent broker standard. So a lot of agents and brokers are, they're basically buying product from somebody. They may or may not take ownership of the product, and then they're selling it on to somebody else. There is a standard that's called the BRC agent broker standard that gives very good, robust look at a program of what it should look like. And all these categories are things that they think about with the personnel, senior management commitment and continual improvement, hazard and risk assessment, product safety and quality management system, and supplier and subcontracted service management. And when you look at those and just kind of breaking them down, what does a senior management commitment and continual approval or a continual improvement look like? With when you're diving into those kind of buckets, some of the things that you might look for in the senior management commitment would be, does the company have dedicated resources? Do they have, are they training their people? Do they have support for training? Do they have written mission statements, shared values and beliefs and norms? And again, going back to some of the things that Paul mentioned before, there are certain things that it's good to know if you match with your expectations of what a company has. And if you walk into a facility and see that they don't really share your norms that you would have in your, with your company or what you feel like you stand for, then it could be something that would be a little bit of an alarm or a red flag, and you might want to step away from that. Another thing that you might look at is the hazard and risk assessment, so another bucket of that BRC agent broker scheme. And things to look for here would be their HACCP plans, how they're managing HACCP, or their food safety plans if they have a food safety plan. Are they reviewing all their raw materials? Are they reviewing their suppliers? Are they reviewing process flow? What's the likelihood of things happening? Risk of if it does not happen, and does it need to be controlled? So same things that you're looking for on the product approval side and on the supplier itself, you want to see that they're managing their suppliers the same way and doing that hazard and risk assessment. So it's kind of like it trickles downhill, really. And the other thing to look at right here as well is, Paul mentioned we're in this pandemic, we're in COVID-19 pandemic that has really rocked all of our worlds, and everybody is scrambling to try to figure out how to manage this. But your supply chain management program probably needs to take a look at this and determine, because you want to know that people are taking care of the people that work with them, and that they're not putting them at risk. So that's a reputational hazard if they are, or a social risk per se, if they are not managing health concerns that are going on. And right now, the major one on all of our minds is, how is everybody managing COVID-19? And we've seen some of it pass through some of the food industry already, where some manufacturing facilities have been completely shut down, and there's been some unfortunate lives affected by it. So it's important to look at this in your supply chain as well. Product safety and quality management, things that, I love this statement. I've carried this quote with me my entire career. Quality is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, intelligent direction, and skillful execution. It represents the wise choice of many alternatives. William A. Foster said that, and that quote I've had laminated on my desk as a person who came up in the quality assurance and regulatory space in my career. That has been something that is a great reminder that it is intentional. Quality and product safety are intentional programs, and if you're intentional with your supply chain, you get the results that you go for whenever you do this. Whenever you emphasize the importance of managing supply chain. And things that you can look for in product safety and quality management space, and again, it might be repeating a little bit. Product safety and quality systems manuals. Do they have internal audits? Hello? Somebody was off mute. So then internal audits, record completion, complaint handling, management of incidents, product withdrawal, product recalls, etc. So things like that are great to look for. Another good one that is not talked about as much, like we've talked about contingency plans. So sometimes positive holds or how you manage your release programs are good to look at here. But also, I would say, like, how do they manage surplus? So how do you handle it if you've made too much? What do you do with that product? Is the shelf life going to be affected? Is there anything else that needs to be considered besides shelf life? Is there a quality risk or a food safety risk? Okay, we're rounding it up, I promise. So product safety and quality management systems. This is another, just continuing on discussing that, but look at this. I feel like this has a really great idea of just like things to kind of keep in mind whenever you're looking at those food safety and quality programs as well. Traceability, I mentioned the positive hold systems, corrective action procedures. Are they thinking about whenever they might have a problem and predicting that they might have it? And then what do they do when they do have that problem? How do they control it? How do they manage it? Document control, big one. And that's a big requirement. For those that are familiar with GFSI requirements, that this is something that they commonly request and ask, is that you control your documents, version controls, whenever you update it, are you writing why you updated it, and documenting that? Do people all have the same version, or are there 70 different copies of the same document across the company, and it's all the different versions that you've had over the past 10 years. So managing that is really important to make sure that everybody has the most up-to-date information. And then of course, there we go. Of course, we talked about the GFSI audit schemes. So what are those suppliers' minimum supplier requirements? Just like you need to consider what your minimum requirements are. Are they looking at, is it depending on the level of product? So if you're at a raw material level, they might not have some of the GFSI audit schemes, or they might not have another supplier. Maybe their suppliers are more like service providers, where they are trucking and hauling companies, and they're farms, going all the way back to the farms. So even farms, though, have the ability to have a GFSI benchmark audit scheme, and many of them do have HACCP plans in place. So some of these minimum requirements are good to consider in your programs, and again in your suppliers' programs. And then other options, of course, would be third-party audit reports, and sometimes you might have regulatory audits or your own secondary or a customer audit. Supplier and subcontracted service management. So these are the kind of buckets that fall into these categories, like how they're managing. I mentioned the hauling or the freight companies. So if you have distributors in your program, if you have Sanitary Transportation Act related carriers, you might need to make sure that they are following all the applicable laws associated with the FSMA guidance for that. Pest control, how is your pest control provider managing it? Is it independent contractors or is it in-house? Those are really important to look at and determine if the people are actually qualified to do the pest control management. Warehousing, do they get third-party audits? How do they manage those types of suppliers? How do they, manage the cleanliness, the training for the employees, and do they have programs to manage and monitor them? Those are also big items. Oh, I keep doing that. I keep clicking ahead. So one category too, and I know we mentioned that, we need to look at automation. So after all of these things, when you write this big robust program and you have these expectations of your suppliers and you know that they're meeting them all, it is a huge document nightmare to be able to manage it all. And depending on how big the company is or how many suppliers and service providers that you might have, it's really difficult to manage the paperwork trail that goes along with this. So things that I think are important to look at with automation, they can include a lot of things. Supplier information, and so that might be their basic contact information, their location, their address, the main contacts, the sales contacts, their emails, anything related to what you might think of as CRM, client relationship management. And then you would have supplier food safety programs. Of course, that's high on my list to monitor and manage, but those are requirements, regulatory requirements as well. So it's really good to think of ways that you can automate that process. One that we didn't touch base on too much during this presentation, but how do you collect all of those product specifications, the nutritional information? How do you make sure that you have the nutritional labels matched up to it if you're creating finished products? And how do you connect all those dots and make sure that you have the most up-to-date information? Raw material specifications as well. Those all roll up into those nutritional labels as well. Do you have potentially an artificial intelligence monitoring tool or surveillance tool that can help you to be able to grab some of that information off the internet and it takes some of the burden off your team? Policies, procedures, and digital forms, anything that can be in a digital form that somebody has to fill out is good to consider converting over to some kind of automated platform. But I will caution you on forms, you have to really know your audience and who is filling out some of that information, because sometimes you won't get the same response that you expect. And my experience is that it takes, it takes a lot of manual assistance to be able to get some of the information that you need. So it's kind of an 80-20 rule whenever I play that game. 80% of the information is going to be easy, but it's going to come from 20% of your supply chain. The other 20% is going to be the one that takes up 80% of your time to go get, because people don't always want to respond the same way, the same priority level that you might expect them to. When that happens, an automated tool is super helpful, where it might, and I put systems integrations in here, so something that might, can you integrate it with your client relationship management tools or CRM tool, like, Salesforce or, any of those. I use Zoho platform in my company, but could you integrate with those types of tools to be able to manage those? Because getting automated reminders takes that burden off your quality assurance person or whoever might be chasing these documents on your team. So you can look at how you can streamline it. A good way to do it is just an end-to-end point of view. So looking from start to finish of how you manage a supplier. You go through potentially a bid process or some type of vetting process. You gather all the information related to that, and then you approve them for the next stage. And the next stage, you gather all that information, and can you streamline it through? So that's my advice on it. I know that's a very quick overview of potential points to automate your processes. I'm always happy to discuss that further with people individually if you wanted to dive into it. And of course, if there's any questions, I will answer those at this time. So I will give it back over to Amy and let her guide us through questions. And I think there's one more polling question.
That's about right. There is one more slide here, and we'll have this information as well on the last slide of the presentation when we're doing Q&A. So this is just Jen's contact info. But just so before we get into our Q&A session, let me just give a last polling question to everybody. And that has to do with what type of supply chain management program you currently have in place. Maybe you're already using software. Maybe you're using hard copy files, lots of filing cabinets and manila folders. Maybe you're personally not aware of the management system being used in your organization. Maybe you're currently not using any particular system, but you're looking for perhaps software. Or if you use suppliers and distributors, perhaps you're relying on them to manage the data collection and such, and you're only collecting a small amount yourselves. And while those answers come in, I'm going to go ahead and quickly talk about some upcoming webinars. Unfortunately, Paula's had to step off the call due to some urgent business to attend to otherwise. But we do have a webinar coming up next week on Tuesday, the 30th, with Accordia, and that is Managing Your Social Accountability and Responsibility Program in 2020 and Navigating Beyond. And that will be featuring guest speaker Richard Ingrao, who is the president of Accordia Global Compliance Group. Excuse me. And it looks like we've got some good participation on that poll, so I'll go ahead and close that out for now. We also will be having a webinar with Canada Gap, hopefully in the next couple of months. We are planning on taking July and August off as many webinars as we have been having, and we'll be back in the fall with a hopefully very robust roster of further webinars. So if you wanted to register for these, you'll be able to find them on our website at PJRFSI.com. Up at the top, there should be a webinar drop-down menu, and the upcoming webinar list, and as well as all the recordings, available slides, all of that will be on our website. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and open up the question tab and see what we've got here. Just a quick reminder, don't be shy. If you had any questions, even vaguely related to what we talked about today, please go ahead and drop them in the questions tab. And it looks like we have one here from Jacob for Jen. Jacob is wondering, are there any requirements for like digital data security for software used in supply chain management?
Oh, that's a great question. And I'm sure there's digital law requirements out there just for privacy acts, depending on what country that you're working in. As far like I know the FDA, Frank Giannis used to be the I think he was vice president of food safety at Walmart and is now in the FDA role, and he is pushing very much for food safety management to be, he's calling it the, the new food safety era, and it's meant to be managing data in a digital format, so he's pushing for it, so I'm sure there's going to be some guidelines in there and how to manage the privacy settings. I don't know. However, a lot of times what I do whenever I'm looking at the data security of any software application is just making sure that they are using platforms that are connected to companies like Microsoft or to IBM or somebody like that that is managing it very well. I know several of them use the Microsoft servers and use the Amazon servers, I believe, and so those have a lot of good security settings in them. But I do have connections if you need to ask that, you know, if you need more in-depth response to that. I have some people in my network that probably could help with that.
Great, thanks. Just speaking from a general PJR awareness perspective, Paul may have piped up on this if you were still on the call. There are some good resources for information security certifications and other information on that topic from the Perry Johnson Registrar's website, and that's pjr.com. And you'd want to look for anything to do with ISMS or ISO 27001. I know there were some videos and even a couple of webinars also put out just general data security, you know, such as keeping an inventory of devices and who's responsible for all of the digital quote unquote paper trails, figuratively speaking. Let's see. Please send in some questions. We'd love to answer anything you might have. Now, I personally have a question for you, Jen, having to do with obviously the current situation. And I know Paul touched on it briefly, and normally we would have spoken about COVID-19 guidelines and requirements. What have you seen changing? I don't know if you might be able to give us an example of something you've seen to do with changes due to COVID.
Well, I think the biggest thing is that people are writing policies around how they're managing it and what their requirements are for their employees, and so they're putting in practice checking temperatures and making sure that people do not have over the I think it's 101.4 degree Fahrenheit temperature before they come into work. And if they have, they might be modifying their sick illness policies or sick day policies if they have any concerns. They don't want people to come into work, obviously. The other thing I'm noticing that's a really it's not a surprising trend, but it's interesting just to watch it unfold, is the way that they're looking at touch points across their company. So they might be restructuring the manufacturing floor a little bit, where the workflow of the product workflow keeps people from overlapping certain areas. And the restaurant industry is a great industry to look at as an example, because the restaurant industry is adjusting whatever, you know, they might be serving. There's a path for the servers that they have to go through, and it can't be the same as the bussers on the tables. And so manufacturing is taking that step as well and writing out, kind of looking at and doing a risk assessment across their production floors and looking at things like the stairwell and how many times people touch that stairwell, and do they need to be on it? You know, are they touching the handrail whenever they're walking up the stairs? So it's interesting to see that go into effect, and then they're doing a little bit more segregation of areas where they're, you know, keeping the raw material people only in the raw areas and don't go anywhere else. I am not seeing it in the food industry as much, but you know, if you're outside of the food industry and maybe in the warehousing industry, in distribution type companies, I'm starting to see where they are, you know, isolating break areas. So they don't want the entire manufacturing group or entire production floor or whoever that might be to go into the break area at the same time. So they're setting up kind of temporary miniature break areas in other areas of the floor. And I know for very specifically to one larger freight forwarding company that has a sort facility, they are setting it up where they have break rooms on each floor segregated away from product so that they're not getting food near it, but they're just making an area so that people can sit down and eat. So that's a new change that I've noticed.
All right, great. There's a related question that just came in from Pinky. How would you maintain social distance on, say, a conveyor belt system with fixed slots?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't know the best answer without being able to look at how the setup is. I've seen some people putting like stools in certain spots so people would sit, or they're making sure that they have stools set up in between workstations so that they're spreading them out a little bit more than they might have been. And then, of course, the other thing that you're hearing, and I'm not an expert in this, so I just want to make that disclaimer, I'm not an expert on COVID-19 in any way, shape, or form, but the CDC guidelines are giving a lot of input in this, and your industry associations are as well, where, you know, maybe you have to set up a divider between people. So there might be a plexiglass divider or some type of divider that is not going to break. Of course, when you're dealing with food, we have to be, you know, aware of the cleanliness factor of it and whether it's going to break. So looking at materials that you might be able to divide up and protect the employees a little bit more, even though they might be, you know, a little bit closer than 6 feet apart, which I believe is the current guidance.
All right, yeah, and this might be a situation, like I mentioned before, we have the contact information for both Paul and Jen. So if you have more detailed questions, or maybe you're looking for some more in-depth consulting type information, please go ahead and take advantage of the contact information on the screen. We would love for you to reach out with any questions. We do have another another question from Ferris. Ferris asks, when it comes to CFIA acceptance, what are the minimum standards the CFIA will accept? And have the CFIA communicated this information? He also says, thanks for the presentation.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'd have to, there's specific guidelines from the CFIA, and yes, they are publicizing those standards. There's a lot in there. The FDA and CFIA have a kind of like a mutual relationship where we look at each other's programs as equivalent from the United States to Canada. So a lot of it is similar to what the FSMA requirements are, but they kind of buckled it up into one package. But your best resource on that is their website. So if you haven't gone onto the CFIA website, that's a really good resource for it. But then if, again, like Amy said, if you need more info on that, please feel free to reach out to, I'm sure Paul has some of those resources as well, but please feel free to contact me and we can talk about it a little bit more, what your exact needs are, because I know they're starting to release information about importing, and they delayed that for a little bit with COVID-19, and now they're letting that, you know, starting to bring that back into effect. So, you know, there's some deadlines that are coming up with the importing community. And importing, I should say importing into Canada. So not importing in the United States. Those have been set for a while.
Yeah, as far as I know, the border into Canada has not yet reopened. Or has it? Did it just reopen this past week? I can't recall. I know it was closed for quite a while.
Yeah, I'm not
all
sure.
right. It looks like we're good on questions for now. If anyone has any more, please just send those in quickly. Any closing thoughts, Jen, before we wrap things up?
No, I mean, overall, you know, you're looking at this whole presentation was more about supply chain management and how to manage it from, you know, basically from a risk perspective. So, you know, when you're writing these things, there's a lot of resources out there, and Paul mentioned that, you know, Perry Johnson Registrars has a lot of great references to this and great programs. And then, of course, on my side of it, my wheelhouse and what I work on is supply chain management for my clients. So, you know, if you need those types of resources, we are definitely here to help.
All right. It looks like we did get one more question from Matthew, and this looks like a pretty complicated question. So if you need me to repeat anything, Jen, just let me know. You mentioned automation in food traceability brings value into the following pain points: supplier info, supplier food safety programs, product specifications, etc. Is this just for supply chain or the actual monitoring HACCP component? I ask this because many GFSI companies I see are slammed on monitoring.
Okay, so, well, I actually was able to open the question and read it with you. So for the pain points, let me just read that again. So traceability brings value in the following. Yeah, so you can look at this as a traceability program. I think that's what you're alluding to from the traceability perspective, but I would also look at it from like a project management perspective. So not just specific to HACCP and monitoring HACCP, although that's a great thing to do and to manage the supply chain and the HACCP, like your HACCP related documents, so your forms, your policies, your procedures, and version controls with those. Like there's some great things out there that can, great software tools that are out there that can help you manage those. And yes, GFSI companies are being slammed on monitoring. I totally agree with that. It is very difficult to manage it all. And there's some great tools out there that help you manage all of that on a software platform. And I know several of them. And I've evaluated several of them, so I feel pretty comfortable that I could steer a little bit on that if you wanted to dive into it a little bit more. But like I said, I want to encourage too, like a big thing to think about is how to automate the just the management of them, not necessarily the content of them. Because you might get great content on one software platform, and it can help you with specific elements where you're tracking code dates and you're tracking paperwork that might be associated with that lot code product, but they might not be helping you automate it. And the pain point I see with managing documentation a lot of times is related to the person or the people that are having to keep up on it and do all the checks and balances. Now, FSMA requirements have started putting on people, and I would go back to, I think it was Paris's question on the CFIA as well. Both of them are requiring where you might do some more sign-offs than you used to. So having that task type project would be great, where you could have a tool that would, somebody upload the production paperwork in, it connects the dots to the lot code so that you have that traceability element, and then somebody is, they have some kind of workflow process that assigns a task to the person responsible for signing off and reviewing that document. Those are the pieces of automation that I think are really important and need to be considered whenever you're developing a good program for supply chain or HACCP management. So hopefully I answered that question. I know that was pretty that was a pretty big weighted question. So I know it's hard to answer that in 3 minutes, but I hope I was able to do that for you.
Yeah, Matthew, hopefully that answered your question. If you need further clarification, again, I just encourage everyone to use the contact info that we have. Write it down now, or we'll have the slides available on the PJRFSI website for download within the next day or two. So just keep an eye out for those, and we're happy to follow up with any offline questions as well. So it looks like that's it for questions. So Jen, I just want to thank you again so much for your time, and everyone, thank you for your time attending. I hope this was helpful to everyone, answered some questions, or maybe got you thinking about how you can start improving your supply chain management program. So we'll sign off for today. I hope everyone has a great rest of the week, and stay safe and stay healthy out there.